7 minutes on live television was all it took for Greg Gutfeld to do what angry parents, church lobbyists, and FCC lawyers never managed in 30 years. He left Howard Stern staring into the camera with nothing to say. The former king of shock radio, the guy who once turned dead air into an art form by never allowing any, suddenly froze. You could see the swagger seep out of his shoulders as the studio audience laughed. At him, not with him. It was the kind of silence that makes producers reach for commercial breaks, except this one was priceless. To understand why that pause felt like a cultural earthquake, rewind to the era when boomboxes and construction sites and Volvo wagons blasted Sterns and censored tirades before dawn. In the late 80s and 90s, he reveled in FCC fines, mocked every taboo, and delighted in dragging politicians into prank call mud pits. No topic, school shootings, celebrity deaths, race, sex was off limits. In 1993, he even donned BL** face to parody Ted Danson, a stunt that resurfaced 3 decades later and still repels new audiences. Fast forward to spring 2020. New York City was banging pots for nurses while Stern barricaded himself in a $20 million Hamptons compound his staff called the Apocalypse Bunker. He refused restaurant tables, wiped groceries with bleach, and berated the unvaxxed as lunatics. Devoted listeners heard something unfamiliar in his voice, fear, and some didn't like the flavor. The guy who once roasted germaphobes had become the most famous one in America. By 2023, the tone shift had a label. Critics called him woke, and Stern embraced it like a trophy. "I am woke, and I love it," he boomed on air, rattling off his pro-vaccine, anti-Trump bona fides and inviting anyone offended to tune out. Longtime fans wondered when the pirate had joined the Navy. Enter Greg Gutfeld, Fox News resident court jester turned ratings monarch. In early 2024, his nightly audience hovered around 2.2 million, beating Colbert, Kimmel, and Fallon. He carved that number with satire, not smut, taking aim at what he calls the smug class: media elites, academics, and celebrities who trade edge for approval. Stern's evolution was a perfect bullseye. Gutfeld opened one Wednesday show with a montage. Vintage Stern hosing guests with porn star sound effects, then modern Stern laughing politely with President Biden. Behold, Gutfeld quipped, "The wall money builds around rebels." Viewers sensed blood in the water. 2 nights later, they shared a round table. Gutfeld's tone stayed playful, but every joke arrived like a scalpel. He thanked Stern for teaching him to attack phonies, then deadpanned, "It's painful watching you join their book club." Stern tried a grin. Words refused to follow. The split-second silence felt like a verdict. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, pick a platform, the clip was trending. Hashtags #WallAroundHoward and #SilentStern rocketed worldwide. Donald Trump, sensing opportunity, called into Gutfeld's show and riffed. He was great until he went woke. Ratings down the tubes. Millions watched just to see Trump smirk at his one-time radio buddy. Stern's counterswing never came. No fiery monologue, no snarky tweet. Instead, he interviewed an A-list actress about her rescue cats and signed off. Fans who once bragged that their hero feared nobody now watched him sidestep confrontation like any polished late-night host. Critics said age had done what censors couldn't. Yet the spectacle was larger than 2 egos clashing. It marked a passing of the rebel torch. In the 90s, authenticity meant vulgarity. In the 20s, it means irreverent skepticism toward establishment narratives. Gutfeld proves you can antagonize power with sarcasm instead of shock, and pull bigger numbers doing it. Still, toppling a legend is easier than burying him. Stern has survived outrage cycles that would vaporize lesser hosts. He apologized for past bits, swore therapy softened him, and even shifted his schedule to 3-day work weeks without hemorrhaging subscription revenue. So the question looms, was that frozen stair a stumble or the first crack in a marble statue? Behind the scenes, SiriusXM executives are nervous. Stern's contract expires at the end of 2025, and analysts warn the platform could lose 9-figure revenue if he walks. Younger podcast stars are already circling, hoping to grab the audience share he leaves behind. Meanwhile, Stern hints about writing another book and focusing on photography, safer ventures than jousting with culture warriors half his age. Wall Street noticed the tremor before Stern's crew could spin it. The morning after the clip detonated online, SiriusXM stock sagged nearly 5% on unusually heavy volume, while Fox Corporation ticked up just enough for analysts to label the move Gutfeld adjacent. Ad buyers quietly began shifting midsummer budgets toward late-night slots they'd once written off as partisan kryptonite, and a handful of podcast networks pitched acquisition decks claiming they could do for talk radio what streaming did for sitcoms. Money, as always, followed momentum, and in those first 24 hours the market delivered its own verdict on who felt hotter and who looked finished. For Gutfeld, the prospect of Stern's quiet fade-out isn't just schadenfreude. It's validation that late-night insurgency has new rules and new gatekeepers. If the original rebel can age into the establishment, anyone can, and someone else will always be ready to pounce. Gutfeld's rise didn't happen in a vacuum. While legacy networks clung to orange spray tan jokes, he built monologues around media hypocrisy, lockdown flip-flops, and beltway groupthink. Viewers who felt mocked by coastal comics discovered a host who laughed with them. He stacked his panel with comedians, wrestlers, and self-deprecating pundits, a cocktail equal parts bar banter and newsroom. By the time advertisers realized he wasn't a fad, he was leading the pack 4 nights a week, proof that rebellion can survive without gratuitous shock. The internet devoured the narrative, but legends rarely exit without a final act. Whether Stern pulls one last stunt or drifts into gentle retirement remains to be seen. What's clear is that in the span of 7 televised minutes, a cultural baton slipped from one loud hand to another, and nobody knows if the old grip can tighten again. Silence can linger only so long before someone fills it, and nature, especially in media, abhors a vacuum. Within a week of the on-air freeze-up, podcasts across the spectrum dissected Stern's lapse. Progressive hosts pitched it as burnout, the inevitable come-down after decades of overdrive. Conservative firebrands smelled blood, calling it proof that political correctness is kryptonite to former renegades. Even supposedly neutral outlets that once tiptoed around his volatility published think pieces titled, "Has Howard Lost the Bite?" The debate felt bigger than one spat. It was a referendum on what rebellion looks like in 2025. Gutfeld, sensing an encore, doubled down. He dedicated an entire monologue to the physics of hype, scribbling Stern's catchphrases on a whiteboard and replacing exclamation points with dollar signs. The audience roared, and the segment cleared 1 million YouTube views by dawn, more proof that momentum loves a winner. Meanwhile, inside the glass-walled SiriusXM studio on Manhattan's West 17th Street, producers weighed their options. Stern's contract guarantees creative control, but churn metrics don't lie. Every quarter-point dip means tens of thousands of potential cancellations. Their star asset still delivers, just not like before. Stern, to his credit, can read tea leaves. Off-air friends say he floated radical ideas, a cross-country tour broadcasting from small-town diners, or a limited-series podcast where he sparred and censored with ideological rivals in person. Both would require leaving the Hamptons. Both might reignite his legend. Confidence heard excitement in his voice and hesitation. Comfort is a hard drug to quit, especially when it buys ocean views and a predictable 3-show workweek. Outside the bubble, commentators called the moment a litmus test for authenticity. Stern, they argued, now sits among the gatekeepers he once torched, while Gutfeld poses as insurgent even from a cable news throne. Same circus, new ringmaster. Meanwhile, a whole swarm of digital renegades was live-streaming the drama from bedrooms and basements, tallying views that would make 90s radio stations faint. Podcastists like Joe Rogan, comics-turned-YouTubers such as Andrew Schultz, and TikTok commentators who slice headlines into 30-second sermons now pull weekly audience numbers that dwarf anything the FCC ever regulated. For them, Stern's frozen grin wasn't just schadenfreude, it was proof that algorithmic relevance beats legacy clout. If a pioneer can stall on live TV, the message is brutal and clear. In a feed that refreshes every 4 seconds, nobody is grandfathered into cool. Stern broke his silence 3 weeks later, admitting he'd mellowed and refusing to resurrect crude stunts just to chase clicks. "I'm proud of who I was, prouder of who I am," he told listeners before plugging a pet adoption drive. Admirable honesty, but for audiences craving fireworks, almost painfully anticlimactic. At Fox, Gutfeld played the clip in split screen while silently sipping coffee. The absence of punchline became the punchline. Viewers filled the gap with memes of tumbleweeds rolling past a SiriusXM microphone. #RetireOrRevive trended, and the internet's verdict was blunt. They wanted resolution, not reflection. By late 2024, whispers of Stern's farewell tour hit Billboard. Promoters pitched arena-size pod concerts, half nostalgia act, half therapy session. Ticket vendors drooled. Stern stayed non-committal, wary of live-streamed missteps. Gutfeld seized the lull to cement his throne, inking a multi-year Fox deal reported to rival primetime anchor money and rolling out pop-up shows in swing state theaters that sold out in hours. When Donald Trump returned for another panel, ratings hit network records. Love him or loathe him, Gutfeld had proven that timing is everything, and Stern's misfire was his cue. Yet history loves a plot twist. Early 2025 leaks teased a surprise summit, Stern and Gutfeld facing off in a neutral studio, no personal insults barred, only libel off-limits. Twitter all but melted, debating whether it would be handshake reconciliation or ruthless rematch. Even if the episode never airs, the rumor alone illustrates how desperately audiences crave closure. Whether that meeting delivers catharsis or chaos is almost beside the point. Two entertainers now personify different eras, one fighting to stay dangerous, the other demonstrating how danger evolves. If Stern lands a knockout rant, he reclaims a slice of his anarchic crown. If he doesn't, graceful acceptance might win him a final round of respect in a climate that profits from venom. Either way, the baton has already moved. Revolutions in entertainment aren't declared, they're felt in a collective gasp. Which leaves the looming question for every would-be provocateur. What happens when the gimmick built to shock the system becomes the system? Maybe every rebel faces the same crossroads: evolve, repeat, or vanish. Gutfeld, for now, evolves by mocking the mainstream from a seat inside it. Stern, by repeating familiar rhythms, risks vanishing inside comfort. But endings in show business are provisional. Madonna reinvents, Letterman grows a beard, and sometimes icons rediscover fire in the ashes of criticism. So picture the possible curtain call. If Stern strides out next year, gray curls under a spotlight, microphone in hand, the crowd will still chant "Baba Booey." If Gutfeld follows in a crisp suit tossing barbs, the roar will chase him too. Audiences worship authenticity even when it contradicts itself. Perhaps that's the secret. Not staying outrageous, but staying unmistakably you. The only unforgivable sin is sounding like someone else, or worse, saying nothing at all. That unspoken law is the real prize Gutfeld extracted during those 7 televised minutes. Silence, for a man who once made fortunes smashing taboos, is louder than any insult. Where Howard goes from here is his choice. Where the audience goes depends on whether they hear a heartbeat or an echo. Rebellion never retires, it just changes hosts.